My daughter-in-law didn't let me take a photo with my son at his wedding, saying they had a new family now and I was unnecessary and unwanted, that she was the most important in his life. But I put her in her place by doing this. Before we start the story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. You can share your thought about the story in the comments. Enjoy listening. The day of my son's wedding should have been one of the happiest of my life. I had imagined it for years. The music, the flowers, the moment I would see him standing tall in his suit, waiting for the woman he had chosen. I wanted to believe I would feel nothing but pride. Maybe a little ache at the thought of him starting a new chapter without me at the center of it. I arrived early, my hands trembling as I straightened the corsage pinned to my dress. It was simple, pale cream roses with a ribbon, nothing that would draw attention. I had promised myself I would stay in the background, smile graciously, and not let my emotions overwhelm me. This was his day, not mine. When he walked into the room before the ceremony, my breath caught. He looked so much like the boy I had raised, and yet so different. His jaw was sharper, his shoulders broader, but his eyes, those warm, earnest eyes, were still my boy's. He hugged me quickly, whispered, "Love you, Mom," and then was swept away by photographers and groomsmen. The ceremony itself blurred past me. I remember the vows, the applause, the kiss. I remember blinking back tears, proud ones. Afterward, we spilled into the reception hall, filled with music and chatter. My sister urged me to go take a picture with him. "Just one," she said. "You'll regret it if you don't." I waited until he was free, then stepped toward him, smiling nervously. "Honey," I said softly, "would you take a picture with your mother?" Before he could answer, she appeared, his bride, her hand sliding possessively into his arm. Her eyes, dark and sharp, flicked to me. "No," she said, with a quick, almost casual finality. "We're doing family pictures now." I froze, not understanding. "I am family," I whispered, my voice cracking. She tilted her chin, smiling at him, not me. "You're his past. We're his new family. This is about us." The words hit me harder than I could have imagined. Around us, a few people turned their heads. My son looked torn, his lips parting as if he wanted to protest. But then the photographer called for the bride and groom, and he let himself be pulled away, his hand sliding from mine as if it had never been there. I stood in that crowded room, music blaring, champagne glasses clinking, and I had never felt lonelier. Humiliation burned hot under my skin, my smile frozen into something brittle. My heart pounded with hurt, but beneath it, something else stirred. A quiet, steady flame. If she believed she could erase me with one sentence, she didn't know me at all. The days after the wedding felt strangely hollow, like walking through a house where all the furniture had been moved overnight. I kept expecting my phone to ring, to hear my son's voice telling me some funny story from the honeymoon, or asking if I could send over a recipe he loved. But the phone stayed silent, and when I finally worked up the courage to call, it was her who answered. "We're busy right now," she said coolly, her tone clipped. "He'll call you when he has time." I thanked her, though my throat felt tight, and hung up before the silence between us became unbearable. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold tea, staring at the framed photos on the wall. There was one of him in Little League, holding the bat too high but grinning with the confidence only a child can have. Another of him in high school, adjusting his tie nervously before prom. I remembered every scraped knee, every late-night talk when the world had let him down. Every morning, I had woken early to make sure he never left the house hungry. I had poured myself into raising him, and now, with one marriage vow, I was supposed to vanish? The more I thought about it, the more I noticed the pattern. The texts that used to come daily dwindled to once a week, then once every 2. When I did see him, she was always there. Her hand looped through his arm, answering for him before he could speak. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that I needed to adjust, to give them space. but then small cruelties began to pile up. When I offered to drop off his childhood desk so he could use it in their new home, she refused. "We don't want old things cluttering up our place," she said, her eyes scanning me as though I were part of that unwanted past. At Thanksgiving, I made his favorite pie. She waved it away, saying, "He doesn't eat that anymore," even as his eyes lingered on the dessert, a flicker of longing in them. Each slight was like a paper cut, small, easy to dismiss, but together they bled me dry. Still, I stayed silent. I told myself he was happy, that love sometimes made people blind. But deep inside, I began to wonder, was it love that kept him tethered to her side, or something else entirely? One evening, as I cleared the kitchen table, I caught myself whispering out loud, "She doesn't know me." Not really, and for the first time, the thought wasn't filled with sadness. It was filled with resolve. It was at a Sunday dinner that I first saw the cracks in their perfect facade. They had invited me over, or rather, my son had, his voice hesitant on the phone, as if asking permission rather than extending it. I baked lasagna, his favorite, and arrived early, hoping to steal a few quiet minutes with him before the house filled with noise. When I stepped through the door, though, it was her who greeted me. Her smile was polished, but her eyes were sharp. "You're early," she remarked, as if it were an inconvenience. My son appeared behind her, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Mom," he said warmly, pulling me into a hug. For a brief moment, I felt the same closeness we'd always shared. But then she cleared her throat, and the warmth seemed to drain from his posture. Dinner was strained. She insisted on pouring his wine, on cutting his portion just so, on answering questions directed at him. Whenever he began to speak about his work or an old memory, she would slide in with a correction or change the subject entirely. I sat across from them, chewing slowly, watching the performance unfold. At one point, I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. His fingers curled toward mine instinctively, but then she placed her hand over his, forcing mine away with a smile that never touched her eyes. "He's tired," she said. "Long week." I swallowed hard, my lasagna suddenly tasteless. After dinner, while she busied herself in the kitchen, he walked me to the door. I could see the conflict etched in his face, the way he lingered as though he wanted to say more. I touched his cheek lightly. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" He hesitated. For a moment I thought he might confide in me, but then her voice rang out, "Darling, could you help me with the dishes?" And just like that, the window closed. He forced a smile. "Of course I am, Mom." "Don't worry," I kissed his cheek, but the words haunted me all the way home. In the weeks that followed, I started paying closer attention. She managed everything, his schedule, his friends, even the clothes he wore. When he spoke, his words carried the faint echo of her opinions. He had always been strong-willed, yet now I saw hesitation, even fear, in the way he deferred to her. One afternoon, a neighbor mentioned seeing her at a cafe with another man. I brushed it off at first, unwilling to feed suspicion. But the seed had been planted. Combined with the way she isolated him from everyone who loved him, the picture forming in my mind was darker than I wanted to admit. She hadn't just married my son, she was consuming him, piece by piece. And I knew I couldn't stand by and watch him disappear. I had never thought of myself as suspicious by nature. I was the type who gave people the benefit of the doubt, who assumed good intentions until proven otherwise. But with her, every instinct in me screamed that something wasn't right. It started small. I noticed she never spoke about her family. At the wedding, none of her relatives were present, and when I asked once, she brushed it off. "They live far away. We're not close." That seemed odd for someone who demanded my son cut ties with his own mother. Then there were the finances. My son had always been careful with money, saving diligently, determined not to repeat the struggles I faced raising him alone. Yet suddenly he was stretched thin. I overheard him once on the phone, voice low, promising he would handle the payment soon. When I gently asked if everything was all right, he changed the subject so quickly it left me breathless. I decided to trust my instincts, not to confront her, not yet, but to observe. When they invited me to their house again, I excused myself to use the restroom and passed her study. The door was ajar. On the desk lay a stack of unopened envelopes, all marked past due. My chest tightened as I glimpsed the amounts: credit cards, personal loans, numbers that would have terrified me even in my hardest years. I returned to the table, my face calm though my heart thundered. She smiled at me as if nothing were amiss, her hand resting lightly on my son's arm. That smile felt like a mask stretched too thin. Later, unable to sleep, I went through old memories in my mind, searching for answers. My son had always been trusting, too kind for his own good. She must have seen that in him, a man willing to sacrifice everything for love, even his own well-being. The next week, I drove into town under the pretense of errands. By chance, or maybe by instinct, I parked near the cafe our neighbor had mentioned. And there she was, seated at a corner table, leaning forward, her laughter too intimate, her hand brushing the arm of a man I didn't recognize. He was older, polished, the kind who carried himself like he owned every room he entered. I stayed hidden, my palms damp, shame flooding me for spying. Yet I couldn't look away. When she reached across and clasped his hand, something inside me hardened. It wasn't just that she was cruel to me. It wasn't just that she kept my son at arm's length from everyone who loved him. She was playing a dangerous game with his heart and his life. Driving home, the weight of what I had seen pressed down on me. I knew I needed proof. I needed a plan. And most of all, I needed to be patient. Because if she thought I was powerless, she was about to discover how wrong she was. Patience had never been my strong suit, but this time I forced myself into silence. If I accused her too soon, I risked driving my son further into her grip. He already walked a delicate line between us. One wrong move, and I could lose him completely. So I watched, I listened, and I waited. I began keeping a small notebook tucked into the back of my kitchen drawer where no one but me would ever look. In it, I wrote dates, observations, and little details she might have thought no one noticed. The nights my son called me late, his voice weary, asking if I could just talk to him for a while, before quickly hanging up when she entered the room. The unexplained jewelry on her wrist that appeared weeks after I saw her with that man at the cafe. The way she insisted on intercepting the mail when I visited their house. Every entry felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if I was seeing patterns that weren't really there? What if my pain from the wedding had sharpened into paranoia? More than once, I closed the notebook, shoved it back into the drawer, and told myself to let go. But then, another moment, another sharp cruelty from her, would rekindle my resolve. One evening, I decided to test her. I arrived unannounced with a casserole, something I had done countless times when my son was single. The look on her face when she opened the door told me everything. Shock, annoyance, a flicker of panic before she forced her lips into a smile. "Oh," she said sweetly, "how thoughtful. But we're heading out tonight." I glanced past her shoulder. My son was in the living room, tie loosened, clearly not preparing for a night out. His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and I saw the truth there. He hadn't known of these plans. "Just leave it, Mom," he called. "We'll eat it tomorrow." Her smile widened, but her hand tightened on the doorframe, as if she wished she could slam it in my face. I left the casserole, kissed his cheek quickly, and walked away with my suspicions confirmed. That night, I opened the notebook again and wrote in bold letters across the page, "She is hiding something. He doesn't see it. I must show him." But how? Confrontation would only drive a wedge deeper. I needed something undeniable, something even she couldn't spin into a lie. As I sat in the dim kitchen, the clock ticking loudly in the silence, an idea began to take shape. Not a rash move, not anger, but something careful, deliberate, and unforgettable. If she wanted me erased from his life, then I would make sure my presence could never be denied. It occurred to me one morning, as I folded laundry and stared blankly at the television, that I couldn't fight this battle alone. My son was blind to her, perhaps willfully so, and I knew my word against hers would never be enough. If I wanted to open his eyes, I needed allies, people who could see what I saw, people whose voices he trusted. I started with my sister, the only person who had truly understood the pain I felt at the wedding. Over coffee at her kitchen table, I told her everything: the bills on the desk, the man at the cafe, the lies about Thanksgiving. She listened without interrupting, her hand pressed firmly over mine. "You can't confront her yet," she said when I finished. "You need proof. Solid proof. Otherwise she'll twist it and he'll resent you." "I know," I whispered. "But how do I get it?" My sister thought for a moment, then leaned in. "Start small. Ask questions, the kind that sound innocent. People like her slip up eventually. And if that man at the cafe is more than a friend, someone else in town has noticed." Her advice steadied me. Over the next few weeks, I practiced patience. I visited when I could, always smiling, always careful not to show the storm brewing inside me. I offered help with errands, watched closely as she declined, almost defensively, as if she feared what I might discover. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, who finally gave me the thread I needed. We ran into each other at the market, and after the usual pleasantries, she lowered her voice. "I don't mean to pry, dear, but I've seen your daughter-in-law around with that fellow. Tall, gray hair, always in a suit. Not just once, either." Several times my stomach twisted, equal parts dread and vindication. "Did anyone else see them?" I asked carefully. "Oh, plenty," she said with a knowing look. "This is a small town." Nothing stays hidden forever. That night, I wrote furiously in my notebook, the pen nearly tearing through the paper. I had allies now, whispers that matched what my eyes had already seen. But whispers alone wouldn't save my son. The next step had to be deliberate. I needed photographs, records, something he couldn't dismiss as gossip, something undeniable. I lay awake until dawn, turning over possibilities. Hire someone? Follow her myself? Each option felt dangerous, reckless, yet the alternative, doing nothing, felt worse. As the sun rose, I poured myself coffee and stared at the framed photo of my son on the mantel. His smile, so open, so trusting, cut through me. "I won't let her destroy you," I murmured to the empty room. "Even if it means risking everything." The first time I followed her, my hands shook so badly I could barely keep hold of the steering wheel. I told myself I wasn't built for subterfuge, that this kind of thing was for private detectives and movies, not for mothers in their 60s. But desperation has a way of teaching you skills you never wanted to learn. It was a Wednesday afternoon. My son was at work, his schedule hadn't changed in years. So when I saw her car pull out of their driveway midday, I knew he wasn't with her. I waited a minute, then slipped my own car into gear and trailed her at a cautious distance. She drove into town, weaving through traffic with the kind of confidence that comes from not expecting to be watched. My heart hammered in my chest, every red light feeling like a spotlight exposing me. At last, she pulled into the same cafe where I had seen her before, and there he was again, the man with the sharp suit and silver hair waiting at a corner table. I parked far enough away to avoid notice, but close enough to see them through the window. They greeted each other with an ease that spoke of familiarity, not formality. She leaned across the table, her smile intimate, her hand brushing his, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I fumbled for my phone, my palms slick with sweat, and snapped photo after photo. Each click of the camera felt like both a betrayal and a lifeline. When she finally rose to leave, her hand lingered on his shoulder a beat too long. I ducked in my seat as she passed my car, praying she wouldn't notice me, but she didn't even glance around. Why would she? In her mind, she was untouchable. Back home, I stared at the photos on my phone until my eyes blurred. They weren't perfect. The glass reflected light. The angles were awkward. But they were enough. Proof that she wasn't where she claimed to be. Proof of a double life. Still, doubt crept in. What if she spun another lie? What if my son, blinded by love or fear, chose to believe her anyway? That night, as I scrubbed dishes I wasn't really cleaning, I realized photographs alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a story so undeniable, a truth so complete that even she couldn't twist it. I needed to know who that man was. For the first time since the wedding, a flicker of hope stirred in me. Maybe I couldn't fight her head on, but I could outwit her. And if I was careful, if I played my cards right, she would be the one to trap herself. I didn't know where to begin. All I had was a face, a silver head of hair, and the tailored suits of a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a small-town cafe. But I had lived long enough to know that people leave trails no matter how carefully they try to cover them. The next time I visited my son's house, I kept my eyes open. While she bustled about the kitchen, I excused myself and wandered into the living room. On the bookshelf, tucked carelessly behind glossy wedding albums, I saw it. A business card. My heart skipped. It bore the name Richard Calloway, financial consultant. I slipped it into my purse, my hand trembling, praying she wouldn't notice the absence. At home, I searched the name online. He wasn't hard to find. His firm was based 2 towns over, specializing in private investments. A smile tugged at my lips, though it was bitter. Investments. Debts. The puzzle began to take shape. But I needed more than speculation. So, I called in a favor. My friend Margaret's daughter worked at the county clerk's office. She owed me for a dozen babysitting nights back when she was a teenager. I asked casually if she could look up any public filings on Richard Calloway. She hesitated, but the bond of old loyalties won out. 2 days later, she called. "You didn't get this from me," she warned, "but your guy's been through 3 messy divorces, big settlements. He's also under review for questionable practices with client funds." I thanked her, my pulse racing. This was more than gossip now. This was dangerous territory, and my daughter-in-law was wading right into it. The next week, I followed her again. This time, instead of the cafe, she met him at a hotel just off the highway. The sight of them disappearing together into the lobby nearly broke me, rage and sorrow colliding in my chest. But I didn't cry. I lifted my phone, snapped the evidence, and walked away with my hands steadier than before. That night, I printed the photos. Laid side by side, the cafe meetings, the hand-holding, the hotel entrance. They told a story no one could ignore. My son might resist at first, but these images were undeniable. And yet, I hesitated. Because if I dropped them in his lap now, she would twist it into poison against me. She would say I stalked her, that I was meddling, obsessed, unwell. No, I thought, smoothing the photographs with careful fingers. It wasn't enough to show she was unfaithful. I needed to reveal her entire web, the lies, the debts, the manipulations. Only then would the truth cut through her facade. And when it did, I promised myself it would happen where everyone could see. The idea of revenge had never sat comfortably with me. I wasn't raised that way. My mother believed in turning the other cheek, in letting life sort out the cruel and the dishonest. But as I stared at those photographs spread across my dining table, I knew this wasn't about spite. This was about saving my son before he lost everything. His marriage, his money, his sense of self. But how to do it? That question gnawed at me for days. If I simply handed him the evidence, she'd find a way to twist it. If I confronted her privately, she'd destroy the proof, or worse, double down on her control. No, this needed to be bigger, louder. It needed to happen in a way where she couldn't escape, where witnesses would anchor the truth so firmly that even her silver tongue couldn't cut it loose. I thought back to the humiliation at the wedding. Her cold words, her arm pulling him away, the sting of being told I no longer belonged. That pain became clarity. If she had humiliated me in front of others, then the stage for her undoing would have to be just as public. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. They were hosting a holiday dinner, inviting friends, colleagues, and family to their new house. My son's voice trembled slightly when he extended the invitation, as though he feared I might decline. But I accepted without hesitation. In the days leading up to it, I planned carefully. I organized the photographs, added dates, and even wrote small notes beneath each one. Cafe, Thursday afternoon, 2 p.m. Hotel entrance, Friday evening, 8 p.m. It wasn't just evidence, it was a narrative, one that spoke for itself. I slipped the pages into a leather-bound photo album, the kind that looked like a keepsake, not a weapon. To anyone else, it would seem like a gift, innocent and thoughtful. Inside, however, it carried the weight of truth. Still, I was afraid. Afraid of the fallout, of my son's heartbreak, of the firestorm that would follow. But fear had to take a back seat now. She had declared war on me the day she told me I was no longer family. I hadn't asked for this fight, but I would not lose it. On the night of the dinner, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress. My reflection looked older than I felt, lines carved deep from years of sacrifice and worry. But my eyes, they were steady, sharper than they had been in years. I picked up the album from the table, holding it close. "This time," I whispered, "you won't silence me." The night of the dinner, the air carried that peculiar weight that comes before a storm. I arrived early, clutching the leather-bound album against my chest like a fragile treasure. The house was warm, candles flickering in the windows, laughter echoing faintly from the kitchen where preparations clattered. My son greeted me at the door, relief softening his features. He hugged me tightly, longer than usual, as if trying to apologize without words. "I'm glad you came, Mom," he murmured. I smiled, smoothing his sleeve. "Of course I did." She appeared moments later, radiant in a red dress, her smile polished like glass. "How wonderful you could make it," she said, her voice laced with sugar. "Come in, make yourself comfortable." I did, moving through the rooms filled with people, neighbors, colleagues, a few extended relatives. The air was thick with chatter and clinking glasses. I felt eyes on me here and there, polite curiosity, maybe even sympathy. Some of them had surely noticed her possessiveness, her subtle cruelties. But no one dared speak. I bided my time. I laughed where I needed to, accepted a glass of wine, even complimented her decorations. All the while, the album rested on my lap, its weight reminding me of the purpose I had come for. As dinner was served, the tension grew. She dominated the table as always, her hand resting possessively on my son's arm, her laugh loudest, her stories carefully crafted to center herself. My son smiled, but his eyes seemed dim, a shadow of the boy I had raised. I waited until dessert was cleared, until the moment when conversation naturally lulled and people leaned back, content. Then I rose, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. "I have something for you," I said, my voice calm, steady. "A gift for my son and his new family." She looked startled, suspicion flashing in her eyes. My son blinked, touched. "Mom, you didn't have to." "I know," I interrupted gently, "but I wanted to." I placed the album on the table and slid it toward him. The guests leaned in, curious. He opened it, his smile softening as he saw the first pages, photos of him as a baby, his first day of school, moments from a life we had shared. Her shoulders eased, though her eyes never left my hands. But then he turned another page. His brow furrowed. A murmur rippled through the table. The photographs shifted, from childhood innocence to recent afternoons, the cafe, the hotel, her hand entwined with another man's. Gasps broke the silence. Forks clattered. My son froze, staring down at the evidence, his face draining of color. She reached for the album, but I placed my hand firmly on it, my eyes locked on hers. "Family," I said softly, my voice carrying through the stunned room. "Doesn't lie." For a long moment, no one breathed. The photographs lay open like a wound, and all the warmth of the evening drained from the room. My son's hand trembled as he traced the images, disbelief flickering in his eyes. She was the first to break the silence. This is ridiculous," she stammered, her voice pitching higher than usual. She forced a laugh that landed like glass shattering. "You've clearly misunderstood. That man he's a client, a colleague, nothing more." But the photographs spoke louder than her words. The cafe meetings, the hotel entrance, the way her hand lingered on his, all of it defied her explanations. Guests exchanged glances, whispers buzzing like bees in the air. Mrs. Callahan, seated at the far end of the table, leaned forward. "I've seen them together too," she said quietly, her voice steady. "It wasn't business." The room erupted then, gasps, mutters, the clinking of glasses hastily set down. My son's face darkened, anger rising in him like a tide. "Why?" His voice cracked, raw. "Why would you do this?" She reached for him, desperation in her eyes. "Darling, please." "You know how your mother is. Always meddling, always trying to come between us. She's twisted this to look worse than it is." But even as she spoke, her mask slipped. There was a sharpness in her tone, an edge of panic that betrayed her. She looked at me then, her eyes full of venom. "You planned this. You wanted to humiliate me." I held her gaze calmly. "I wanted the truth to be seen." My son closed the album slowly, his hands rigid, his jaw clenched. "Tell me it isn't real," he said, his voice shaking. "Look me in the eye and tell me." For once, she had no words. The silence that followed was her answer. He pushed back his chair so abruptly it nearly toppled. He stood there breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. "I gave you everything," he said hoarsely. "And you?" His voice broke, and he couldn't finish. She reached for him again, but he stepped back. "Don't," he warned, his tone so cold it silenced the entire room. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some rising, some staying rooted, unsure of whether to leave or witness the unraveling. But no one spoke. At last, my son turned to me, his eyes wet, his face pale. "Mom," he whispered, voice shaking. "How long have you known?" I swallowed hard, choosing my words carefully. "Long enough. But I needed you to see it yourself." The weight of truth settled over the room like heavy snow. And for the first time since his wedding, my son reached for me, not out of obligation, but out of need. The guests began to scatter quickly after that, murmuring polite excuses, their eyes darting between my son and his wife, as though they had witnessed a car crash they couldn't bear to keep watching. Plates clattered as chairs scraped back from the table, and within minutes, the house was empty, save for the three of us. The silence was unbearable. My son stood with his back to us, one hand gripping the edge of the dining table, knuckles white. She hovered a few steps behind him, her face pale, but her voice already sharp with defense. "You can't believe her," she snapped, gesturing toward me. "She's been waiting for this moment since the wedding." "She hates me. She's jealous. This is nothing but a performance." He turned slowly, his expression hollow. "Performance?" His voice was low, dangerous. He lifted the album and flipped it open again, the photographs staring back like ghosts. "That's you. That's him. Hotel? Cafe? Explain that." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Business. I told you. It's business. Business doesn't look like this." He cut her off, jabbing a finger at the picture of her hand on Calloway's. His voice cracked with fury. "And business doesn't go to hotels in the middle of the night." She faltered then, her shoulders slumping as though the fight was draining out of her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I was lonely. You work all the time. You're never here. Don't you dare," he roared, slamming the album shut. "Don't you dare blame me for your choices." I stood quietly in the corner, my heart aching for him, though I knew I couldn't shield him from this pain. He had to walk through it himself. Finally, he turned to me, his face softening, his voice trembling. "Mom, thank you. If you hadn't shown me." His voice broke, and he covered his eyes with his hand. She tried one last time, reaching for his arm. "We can fix this," she pleaded. "It doesn't have to end like this." "I'll stop seeing him. We can start over." He shook her off. "No. It ended the moment you chose him over me. Over us." The silence that followed was thick and final. She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. My son walked past her, past the wreckage of the evening, and stopped in front of me. "Come on, Mom," he said hoarsely. "I can't stay here tonight." And for the first time in years, it was just the two of us again, walking out into the night together. The night air was sharp, biting at our cheeks as we stepped out of the house. My son carried nothing with him, not even his coat, just the album pressed tightly against his side as though it were both anchor and weapon. I unlocked the car in silence, letting him settle into the passenger seat before I slid behind the wheel. We drove without speaking for several miles. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional hitch in his breathing. The way he swallowed hard, as though trying to force back everything breaking inside him. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, giving him time, giving him space. When we finally reached my house, he followed me inside like he had when he was a boy coming home after a bad day at school. He dropped heavily onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I feel sick," he whispered. I sat beside him, placing my hand on his back. "I know. She was everything I thought I wanted," he continued, his voice muffled. "I believed her. Every word, every smile, every promise. And all the while..." He trailed off, shaking his head. How could I have been so blind? I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that love makes fools of all of us, but I knew he needed more than comfort. He needed truth. "You weren't blind," I said softly. "You were trusting. You gave her your whole heart. That's not weakness, son. That's who you are. Don't let her take that goodness from you." He lifted his head then, his eyes red, his face drawn. "But she almost destroyed me. And if you hadn't..." He glanced at the album on the coffee table, his voice breaking. "If you hadn't been watching, I'd still be living in her lie." The weight of his words pressed down on me. I had wanted him to see the truth, yes, but I hadn't imagined how it would gut him. For all my careful planning, nothing could soften the pain of betrayal. "You're not alone," I reminded him, squeezing his hand. "You never were. Not then, not now." For a long time, we sat like that. His hand in mine, silence stretching between us, heavy but not unbearable. It felt like old times, when he was little and I would sit by his bed through storms, waiting for the thunder to pass. Finally, he leaned back, his voice steadier. "I can't go back there. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." "Then don't," I said firmly. "You stay here as long as you need." For the first time in months, maybe years, his shoulders eased. He exhaled, a sound more weary than relieved, but it was something. That night, under my roof, my son slept like he hadn't in a long time, safe, broken, but no longer trapped in her shadow. By morning, the phone was already ringing. My son ignored the first 3 calls, the screen flashing her name again and again. On the 4th, he answered, his voice hoarse. "What do you want?" Her voice was shrill enough that I could hear it across the room. "You can't just walk out on me. Do you know how this looks? Everyone was there last night. My friends, your colleagues, you've humiliated us." "You humiliated yourself," he said coldly. "Don't call me again." He hung up, his hand shaking as he tossed the phone onto the couch. But silence wasn't part of her nature. Within an hour, she had sent a string of messages. "You misunderstood. I can explain. Please, don't let your mother ruin what we have. She's always hated me. She staged this. She's manipulating you." My son read them all with a hollow expression. "She won't stop," he muttered. And she didn't. Over the next few days, she called his office, left voicemails, even showed up at his workplace, weeping in the lobby until security escorted her out. I watched the toll it took on him, the weight pressing heavier each time her name appeared on his phone. But the true blow came in the form of whispers around town. She had started her counterattack, spreading stories that I was unstable, that I had orchestrated the entire display out of jealousy, that I couldn't let go of my son. Some people believed her. Old friends looked at me differently in the grocery store, their smiles strained, their greetings short. Others, though, nodded at me with quiet solidarity, their eyes saying what their mouths wouldn't. They had seen enough of her to know. One evening, my son sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face pale with exhaustion. "She's poisoning everything," he said, rubbing his temples. "And the worst part is, part of me still—" He hesitated, his voice breaking. "I still love her." Even after all this, I reached across the table, taking his hand. Love doesn't vanish overnight. But love isn't blind obedience either. What you're feeling, that's human. Don't confuse it with weakness. He nodded, though his eyes brimmed with conflict. I knew then that her claws were still in him, even if the truth had begun to set him free. And I knew she wouldn't let go quietly. This wasn't over. Not by a long stretch. But neither was I. The escalation came on a rainy Thursday, sudden and vicious. My son had been at my house nearly 2 weeks, trying to steady himself, when she appeared on the doorstep uninvited. Her hair was damp from the storm, her red coat clinging to her, but her eyes burned with fury. "You can't keep him here," she snapped before I could even speak. "He's my husband, not your child. You've filled his head with lies, poisoned him against me." Enough. My son stepped forward, his jaw set. "No one poisoned me. You did that yourself." Her expression flickered, fear, then defiance. "You're confused. You're hurt. But we can fix this. We just need space, away from her." She pointed at me like I was a disease. "Come home with me, and we'll make it right." He shook his head. "There's no fixing betrayal." Her voice broke into a sob. "You don't understand. It wasn't what it looked like. Richard, he's just a friend, someone who was helping me with financial problems." "Hotels aren't for financial advice," my son shot back, his voice shaking with anger. Her tears dried instantly, replaced with ice. "If you leave me," she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret it. You'll lose everything. Your job, your reputation. Do you think people won't listen when I tell them how controlling your mother is? How unstable she is? They'll believe me. They already do." The venom in her tone was so sharp it made my chest tighten. She wasn't pleading anymore. She was threatening. My son's face hardened. "Get out," he said, his voice steady. She laughed bitterly. "You think you can just walk away? You think she can replace me? I'm your wife. And if I go down, I'll take both of you with me." When he didn't move, she turned her fury on me. "You think you've won? You humiliated me in front of everyone, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. You'll regret this." I stepped closer, my voice calm, though my heart thundered. "No, dear. The only one who should regret is you. You tried to erase me. But you forgot. I raised him. He knows who I am. And now, so does everyone else." For a moment, she looked ready to strike. But then she spun on her heel, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed felt heavy, dangerous. My son sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. "She's not finished," he whispered. And he was right. The storm was only beginning. She didn't wait long to strike. Within a week, the rumors spread like wildfire. At the grocery store, I overheard two women whispering, their voices lowered but sharp enough to cut. "Poor thing, married into that family. His mother's always been overbearing. I heard she staged the whole thing out of jealousy." At church, one of the deacons pulled me aside with a sympathetic look. "I don't know what's going on, but you might want to be careful. People are talking." Her campaign was methodical. She painted herself as the victim, an innocent wife torn apart by a meddling mother-in-law who couldn't let go of her son. The photographs, she claimed, were fabricated. The man at the cafe? A business mentor. The hotel? Coincidence. She had answers for everything, no matter how flimsy. And some people, perhaps too polite or too gullible, believed her. My son bore the brunt of it. At work, colleagues pulled away, wary of gossip. A promotion he'd been up for was suddenly postponed. He came home one evening with his shoulders hunched, his eyes hollow. "She's poisoning everything," he muttered. "It's like fighting smoke." No matter what I say, people look at me like I'm the liar. I wanted to shield him, to scream at the world to see the truth, but fury alone wouldn't win this war. She thrived in shadows, in whispered stories. If I wanted to protect him, I had to drag her into the light. So I started gathering more. Quietly, carefully. A friend at the bank confirmed what I'd suspected. Her accounts were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed, loans unpaid, even a line of credit under my son's name that he hadn't known about. Worse, there were transfers. Money moving into an account under Richard Calloway's name. I stared at the statements until my hands shook. It wasn't just betrayal of the heart anymore. She was bleeding him dry, setting him up to fall with her. When I showed him, his face went pale. "She forged my signature," he whispered, his voice strangled. "Mom, she's destroying everything I've built." I placed a hand over his. "Then we stop her. Not with rumors, not with whispers, with truth that no one can deny." He nodded slowly, a flicker of determination breaking through the despair. For the first time, I saw the man I'd raised, the fighter, the boy who had weathered storms by my side. She thought she could ruin us in the dark, but I was ready to bring the dawn, no matter how blinding it would be. The decision to fight back wasn't made in anger, it was made in clarity. For weeks, she had twisted reality, painted lies into truth, and counted on people believing the prettier story. But I had lived too long, endured too much, to let deceit stand unchallenged. My son and I sat together at the kitchen table one evening, papers spread out before us. Bank statements, loan records, the photographs, every scrap of evidence we had gathered. It looked less like a family dispute and more like the beginnings of a criminal case. "She's stolen from me," he said quietly, his jaw tight. "And if those transfers keep going, she'll drag me under with her." "Then we won't let her," I answered. We needed more than just proof. We needed people who could vouch for us, people who had seen her mask slip. I began reaching out discreetly. Mrs. Callahan was the first to step forward, firm in her recollection of the cafe meetings. Others followed. An old co-worker who admitted she had once confided in him about an older man helping her out. A friend who recalled her bragging about money she hadn't earned. Piece by piece, the picture became undeniable. But it wasn't enough to hold the truth quietly in our hands. We needed a stage, somewhere her lies would collapse under their own weight, where she couldn't twist or distract. The opportunity came in the form of a charity gala, one she had been boasting about for weeks. She was on the planning committee, desperate to flaunt her status in front of the town's most respected faces. If she wanted to shine, we would let her, right before pulling the curtain down. "Are you sure?" my son asked when I suggested it. His eyes were tired, but there was steel in them now. "Yes," I said. "She used your wedding to humiliate me. She used gossip to humiliate us. Now it's time the truth humiliated her." The days leading up to the gala were tense. I worked quietly, gathering the last pieces, copies of the forged loan documents, a signed statement from the banker, and the photographs printed clearly, without shadows or doubt. My son rehearsed what he would say, though I reminded him he didn't need speeches. The truth itself was enough. On the night of the event, I stood before the mirror again, fastening a simple necklace around my throat. My reflection looked older still, but behind the lines was resolve, unshakable now. "This ends tonight," I whispered. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt something close to peace. The gala glittered with chandeliers and sequined dresses, laughter and clinking glasses echoing across the ballroom. I had not attended such an event in years, but walking through those doors with my son at my side, I felt no hesitation. We weren't there to dazzle. We were there to end the charade. She spotted us almost instantly. Her smile faltered, then sharpened as she swept across the room in a gown that shimmered under the lights. "Well," she said, her voice honeyed, "look who decided to crawl out of hiding. How brave of you to show your face after the spectacle you caused." My son's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I only met her gaze steadily. "We thought it was time for the truth to be seen." Her eyes narrowed, but she quickly masked it with a laugh, turning to her circle of admirers. "You see what I deal with? Always dramatic. Always trying to be the center of attention." She patted my son's arm as though he were still hers to command. "Don't worry, darling. Tonight is about charity, not family squabbles." But the cracks were already visible. Whispers followed us as we moved through the room. People who had once looked at me with suspicion now nodded faintly, their curiosity piqued. The rumors she had planted were seeds, but seeds can't survive when the soil is flooded with light. As the evening wore on, she took the stage to deliver her speech. She basked in it, her voice dripping with self-importance, thanking donors, painting herself as a pillar of grace and generosity. My son sat beside me, his hand clenched into a fist on his knee. When she finished to polite applause, the host invited him forward to speak on behalf of the committee. She hadn't expected that. I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes as he rose, carrying a slim folder in his hand. He stood tall under the lights, his voice clear, though his throat trembled. "My wife has spoken of generosity tonight," he began. "But generosity cannot exist without truth." The room hushed instantly. She shifted in her seat, her smile brittle. He opened the folder and held up the photographs. "While she asked for your trust, she betrayed mine." "These are not rumors. These are facts." His voice gained strength as he spoke, laying out the evidence piece by piece, the financial transfers, the forged signatures, the hotel meetings. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her mask shattered. She leapt to her feet, her voice shrill. "Lies! All of it, lies!" But no one moved to defend her, not this time, because the truth, finally, belonged to us. The ballroom erupted the way dry wood does when it catches a spark. Sudden, uncontrollable, fierce. Guests rose from their tables, voices overlapping in shocked murmurs. Some craned their necks to see the photographs more clearly, others whispered behind gloved hands. The air pulsed with disbelief and fascination, the sweet perfume of the gala soured by scandal. She was at the center of it, eyes wild, her composure unraveling thread by thread. "This is a setup!" she shrieked, her voice cracking against the high ceiling. "They forged those papers, this is all her doing." She jabbed a finger toward me, venom dripping from every syllable. "She's been obsessed with him since the beginning. She can't stand to let him go." The crowd recoiled, her hysteria louder than the string quartet still playing faintly in the corner, as if unaware of the war raging in front of them. My son stepped forward, his voice steady now, cutting through the noise. Enough. She froze at the authority in his tone, the finality. You think anyone here will believe this circus? She demanded, her laughter jagged, desperate. They don't have to, he said, lifting the signed statements, the bank records. Because the police will. The silence that followed was electric. Her face blanched, then twisted with rage. She lunged toward him, snatching at the papers, but he stepped back, holding them just out of reach. Her heel caught on the edge of the stage, and she stumbled, catching herself on the podium with an ugly scrape of nails against wood. Gasps rippled through the crowd again, not out of sympathy, but out of the undeniable spectacle of her collapse. You'll regret this, she screamed, her voice breaking. Both of you. You think you've won, but you haven't. He'll come back to me. He always will. My son's face was pale but unyielding. No, he said firmly, the words slicing through her delusion. I'm done letting you own me. Security moved then, summoned quietly by the host. Two men in dark suits stepped forward, their presence enough to send a shiver through the room. She tried to protest, her words tumbling over each other in incoherent fury, but no one listened. Not anymore. As they escorted her toward the exit, her voice echoed behind her, shrill and hollow. The doors slammed, leaving only silence and the stunned faces of those who had witnessed the fall. My son lowered the folder, his hand trembling slightly, but when he turned to me, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. Freedom. The storm had broken, and though the wreckage lay everywhere, he was still standing. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle, though echoes of the storm lingered everywhere. The gala had been the spark that burned through her lies, and once exposed, she could not rebuild. She tried, of course, filing angry statements, sending messages laced with venom, but the evidence spoke louder than her words. The forged documents, the money trails, the photographs, they stood as a wall she could not climb. My son filed for divorce. He moved his belongings out quietly, without ceremony, leaving behind a house that had never truly been his. She fought viciously, threatening court battles and ruin. But with every threat she made, the ground beneath her crumbled further. By the time the proceedings began, she was little more than a shadow, her reputation shredded beyond repair. Through it all, my son stayed with me. The first nights were the hardest. He would wake from restless sleep, pacing the halls like a man haunted by ghosts. Sometimes he would sit at the kitchen table long past midnight, staring at nothing, the weight of betrayal pressing on him like a stone. I didn't fill the silence with words. I sat with him, poured him coffee, and let him know he wasn't alone. Slowly, the heaviness lifted. One evening he smiled, small, fragile, but real, as he helped me fix a leaky faucet. Another morning, he left for work with his shoulders straight, his steps sure. He began to laugh again, the sound rusty at first, then freer, like sunlight breaking through clouds. And with every step he took toward healing, I felt my own heart mend. I had feared after that wedding day that I had lost him forever, that she had stolen not just his time, but his soul. But the truth had given him back to me, not as the boy I once held, but as the man I had always known he could be. One quiet Sunday, we sat together on the porch, the air warm with spring. He turned to me suddenly, his expression soft but earnest. "Mom," he said, "I don't think I ever told you. I know I wouldn't have survived this without you." Tears pricked my eyes, but I smiled. "You don't have to thank me. I only did what a mother does." "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "You did more. You saved me from her. You saved me from myself." I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "I only reminded you who you were." The past could not be erased, the humiliation, the lies, the nights of doubt, but it no longer bound us. We had walked through fire and come out stronger, our bond tempered like steel. As the sun dipped low, casting the porch in golden light, I thought of her words on the wedding day. You're his past. We're his new family. How wrong she had been. Because family cannot be replaced. Family endures. Always. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.